Now, he uses the word Jews here as we would use the word Israelites, meaning the faithful. They say they're the faithful ones, but they're not. They're really the synagogue of Satan, because what was happening is that the national Jews were actually encouraging the government officials to go after the Christianized Jews. And so the message is, I know all about your troubles. I know all about those who are the synagogue of Satan. He says, do not fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Now remember what we said about the crown of Smyrna? So this is not that crown, but it's the crown of life. But it's so similar that there's a little play on words here. But notice he's going to give it to them. They don't have to earn it. They don't have to achieve it. They don't have to give so much tithe or do so many good deeds to receive it. It's a gift from God, and the gift is given to them. Here's the message if you summarize it. It's from the one who was dead and yet he lives. There's no criticism for this church. He knows their tribulation. He knows about their poverty. He's aware of the bad things people are saying about them. He tells them that some of them will be put in prison. He tells them that some of them will die. And he also says this is going to last for 10 days. And then they will be given a crown of life. So those who were persecuted were going to have experienced poverty, people blasphemy against them. They'll be in prison. They'll become martyrs. It will last 10 days, but they will be given a crown of life. Now, what is this 10 days talking about? And what is this blasphemy? Well, the blasphemy goes like this. They were talking about these Christianized Jews, and they're saying, first of all, you know, these Christianized Jews, they're really cannibals because they participate in the Lord's Supper. And they talk about, this is his blood, this is his body. And they're eating and drinking it. And so they were accused of being cannibals. And then they were accused of sexual orgies. Because what they were saying is that, well, these folks are always talking about love. You know, they're fixated on love. They love each other. So they're having these wild sexual orgies. And they're destroyers of families because their message is, you know, that you have to love this carpenter guy more than even your wife or your brother, your sister, your father or mother. And they're atheists because they're following a human carpenter and they're not bowing down and worshiping and offering sacrifices to Cybele and the emperor and others. And that they are politically disloyal because they will not do what the emperor tells them to do. And they are incendiaries because, after all, you should hear them talk. Those Christians are always talking about burning things. They're talking about, well, they call it hell. And so these are the things that they're saying were problematic with the Christians and why they should be executed. Now, the number 10 does not mean literally they're going to be persecuted for 10 days. It doesn't even mean 10 years. What it means is there will be a time of testing. We know the persecution lasted a couple of 100 years. Well, what does the 10 mean? Well, it's the fullness of testing. Jacob's wages in the Old Testament were changed 10 times. You can read about it in Genesis 31. There are 10 plagues on Egypt. The time of testing. There are 10 commandments, Exodus chapter 20, time of testing. Job's friends tempted him 10 times, according to chapter 19 and verse 3. The Israelites tempt God 10 times in Numbers 14:22. And Daniel and his friends were tested for 10 days. It seems as though the ancients really kind of looked at their 10 fingers, and they said that's the fullness. So the number 10 had to do with fullness of testing. Now, could you identify maybe a period of 10 days or 10 years that were particularly nasty? Probably not. To be honest, there were times all through this couple 100-year period where people were persecuted, and worse sometimes than others. But it's the fullness of the time of testing that's important. This is what Daniel 1 has to say. Please test your servants for 10 days. And Nebuchadnezzar tested them for 10 days, and at the end of the days, he found them to be 10 times smarter. So what we see is that the number 10 has to do with this time of testing. So they were going to have tribulation for 10 days, meaning they're going to have tribulation over a shorter period of time compared to the thousands of years as we look back on it now. And then the last part of the verse says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. Now, the word overcome here, remember what we said last week in Greek? What is it in Greek? It's Nike, like the shoes. Because you overcome, you run the race, and you win. Now, this is not an advertisement for Nike, but it's about those who overcome. Jesus said, those who overcome will not be hurt by the second death. What he's talking about here is the first death, we all die. All humans experience that kind of death. But the second death is an eternal death. And he's saying the overcomers will not experience that. It's interesting that the word overcomes, he who overcomes, or the overcomers, is in the it's a participle, and so you continually are overcoming. Isn't that good news? It's not like you reach a certain place and you've arrived, but you're continually growing, continually overcoming. Remember the Beatitudes? Jesus said this, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. That's perfect for Polycarp. And then Jesus said, if they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. In this world you will have trouble. If we were in a different part of the world today, we would be meeting in fear of our lives. And so this message would perhaps be very, very appropriate, and it would be very literal that we're dying for our faith. Those around us would be dying. But we're living in the land of free. And so while this is Memorial Day weekend and we celebrate those who have died in the great fight, and we believe that our loved ones will see again, we know that we have trouble in this world, but thanks to them, we're free. So the message of dying for Christ is not something that we're real familiar with in this country. Some of you are familiar with it because you've come from other countries. But notice what Apostle Paul says in the book of Philippians. It says, for you have been given not only the privilege of trusting in Christ, but also the privilege of suffering for him. You may not die for Christ in this country at this time, but you will suffer for Christ. I've talked to people, some of you, who have refused to work on a Saturday, and you believe, that's the Lord's day, and you're not going to change that. You're not going to work. You're going to keep that day holy, and you've been persecuted. Some of you, especially some women, have talked to me, and they've said, if I join your church or I become a member of your faith,